Hi, friends. I'm Debony Morgan.
And I'm Carl McColman. I also go by Sky. And this is the Radical Mystics podcast.
It's a forum for punk perennialists, feral contemplatives, and others who live at the intersection of silence and resistance,
Now, we are recording this episode live through Substack.
which means that this is unfiltered, unedited, and unapologetically authentic.
Now, this is our first episode, so forgive us if we're a little rough around the edges. Our mission for this episode is to introduce ourselves to you and to share a little bit of our vision for this podcast.
Yeah, so I'm completely okay with rough around the edges. That sounds a little punk. And so yeah, we'll get into that a little bit. But Sky, I wanted to start by saying, introduce yourself. What's your story?
Well, I'll try to keep this brief.
It's
Um,
hard.
so I am about as white middle class American as you can get. I grew up in the 60s and 70s. I like to say my formative years were between the election of John F. Kennedy and the murder of John Lennon. So that's my background. And during that time, when I was about 16 years old at a church camp, I had an experience that I can only call a mystical experience, an experience of divine love, divine light, an experience of feeling one with the divine. And that really launched me on my spiritual journey. A friend gives me a copy of the book, Evelyn Underhill's book, Mysticism. And that really introduced me to kind of mysticism in a Christian sense. And I would credit Yogananda and Ram Dass for introducing me to more of an interspiritual, maybe even perennialist, eclectic kind of world mysticism sense. My story took many twists and turns. I explored obviously Christianity, Christian mysticism, but also pagan spirituality, goddess spirituality, Wicca, that kind of thing. I got interested in Native American and indigenous paths, very interested in Buddhism and the Dharma, those kinds of practices. Along the way, I hung out with Trappist monks. I've done some work with the psychedelic community, became very much kind of in love with the divine feminine, uh, you know, got involved in spiritual direction, both receiving and eventually providing. Uh, Became a retreat director thanks to the Trappists and their faith in me. And along the way, I've done a little bit of writing and podcasting and that sort of thing. So that's my brief story.
No, that's a great story. You mentioned spiritual direction, and I think that would be something fun for us to talk about as we go here. I think that would be great for our listeners to learn a little bit more about that, since you and I are both passionate about that. Um, yeah, so my story it's parallel, right? I've kind of got two stories that layer on top of each other. So to my spiritual story is that I was baptized by Southern Baptists, as they like to do. I later attended one of the I think it was the first non-denominational megachurch, Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. Um, and I did a Christian theater ministry for 14 years. And we're, altar calls and the whole nine yards, the whole thing, with Creation Studios. And I graduated from an Assemblies of God Bible College. Yeah, I even had to sign a contract that I would not dance, because,
Oh,
I danced anyway.
okay.
They can't take they can't take my diploma back. So I think that's okay. Um, Eventually, I began deconstructing and ended up doing a degree in psychology where my master's thesis was on the feminine representation of God, feminine divine, and why that was important to women's spiritual development. Funny enough, they told me that nobody knew what I was talking about and that I couldn't do, they originally said I couldn't do my thesis on that because nobody understood that. So I had a real laugh sitting in the theater watching the Da Vinci Code going, yeah, no one's ever going to get this stuff. Um, and then I later earned a certificate in contemplative and non-dual consciousness and the inaugural cohort of the Living School. So that's one story. The other story is all the while, starting from the time I was right out of high school, I was writing rock reviews and interviews for an indie music paper called The Eye in Orange County. And I was hanging out with bands. I was playing in bands. I was dancing at new wave clubs in Hollywood and generally cavorting around in the music industry and underground scene in Los Angeles and sometimes New York and sometimes Middle Georgia. And we can unpack all of that later. But for right now, I would call myself a Celtic Christian. So I observe the wheel of the year and the some of the pagan practices that go along with that, without letting go of the Christianity that I originally was founded in, just at a very much more progressive way of looking at that.
Absolutely. So I guess my question for you would be, when people get to know you, what surprises them
Yeah.
about you?
Well, and that goes back to my sort of my double thing, right?
Okay.
So I would meet people in a finger quotes spiritual context. And so they would see me as, I'm the good little Christian girl doing the good little Christian things. And then they would be very surprised that I'd been out till 3 in the morning in Hollywood, right? To me, I never saw a contradiction in any of that. But I guess that's not as common as I expected it to be. And then vice versa, when people get to know me through a music environment, hanging out with people in the industry and whatnot, they are frequently surprised when I'll quote somebody or respond with a worldview that reflects a very serious spiritual life.
Mm.
So that's the thing that who is surprised by what depends on the context, right?
All right.
And I think my demeanor is fairly laid back, and so a lot of times people are surprised that I do like to have an intellectual life. I do like to study. I do like to um, educate myself, and so I have a really serious introverted side
Mhm.
that people don't um, often expect. It's
And-
not all hang loose bra,
okay. Yeah.
know.
Cool. Cool.
Well, how about you? What surprises people when they get to know you?
Well, I've given that some thought because, of course, you and I drew up these questions a few days ago. But I would say is that I think people are surprised at how snarky I am. That
Yeah.
here I've written these books on mysticism and the read the Bible like a mystic and so forth, and so I think there's a certain kind of perception that I am kind of a serious kind of a
Yeah.
contemplative, and
Right.
I guess that I have that side, but what I like to say is that I am as irreverent as I am reverent, and I try
Yes.
to
Yes.
do both. I think I do have a deep love for mystical spirituality, contemplative spirituality, kind of the tradition of cultivating the interior life. I'm very much, somebody who loves at least the culture of Christianity, the art, the architecture, whatnot. So reverence is a part of my story,
Yeah.
but so is irreverence. I'm not afraid to go into those places where I have a fraught relationship, especially with the institutional church,
Yeah.
but also with the tradition. And I was on a call the other day and I was giving a talk on Evelyn Underhill's book, Practical Mysticism. And I finished the talk and somebody said, "You seem so critical of her." And that surprised
Wow.
me. And I said, "Well, I think I'm critical of her the way, people can be critical of their government. That doesn't mean they don't love their country. Oftentimes, it's because they love their
Yeah.
country so much that they're willing to express their criticism." And so I'm the same way. My snark and my irreverence comes from a place of deep affection and
Yeah.
deep love, but it still surprises people. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that might be one of the reasons we're such good friends is I definitely see that in you. I have
mhm.
so much respect for your personal practice and I see that reverence in you. And also I see that snark.
Wonderful.
And it's a both and. It's never a one or the other. It's always a both and.
Well, thanks. Well, in continuing the surprise of this conversation, people may be surprised by the taglines that we've given ourselves. So,
Yeah.
Debony, punk perennialist. Can you at least briefly? I have a feeling we'll be unpacking this for a long time to come.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
get us started.
definitely.
What is that?
Well,
What
first of all, Carl, you get credit for the moniker, right?
Okay,
I
fair
did
enough.
not think of that for myself. You presented it to me,
Uh-huh.
and yeah, top of my head blew off. I'm like, that is so perfect. It's so perfect because the part of my story that I didn't share, and I won't do very much here. We can go into it later, but I've suffered a lot of religious trauma at the hands of the church
Mhm, mhm,
and institutions and Christian people as individuals.
mhm,
Um, a lot. And I have rarely, there's a few occasions, but they're few and far between, felt welcomed into Christian spiritual religious places. So in that regard, I've always felt like a punk. I've always felt like an outsider. And I think the punk ethos, and we'll unpack a lot of that later, but I to me it's not hard to layer that over the values of mysticism and the values of a contemplative and progressive point. So, some of those are breaking down binaries
mhm.
and not buying somebody else's definition of who you are or what you should be in a spiritual context, but also when it comes to race, gender, music, art, power. Punks are always going to question that. And when I asked my adult son, I said, "So, how would you define punk rock?" And he gave me a very cold stare and said, "You can't define punk rock. What the hell are you doing?" And it's like, okay, exactly. So there you go. Punk is something that you, by its own definition, finger quotes definition, is not to be defined because the minute you say it is one thing, it's going to push back and show you that it's not. One of my fave little memes from a few years ago, and I sent this to my buddy who runs the Punk Rock Museum in Las Vegas, and he put it on display there. Is this young kid who's obviously a punker? He's got the Liberty Spike hair, he's got the spikes on his jacket, and there's a young child kind of gently touching one of the points on his jacket as the punker guy kneels down. And so the title of it is Kindness is Punk as Fuck,
Yeah.
right? As the minute you think it's one thing, it's something else. But the general values, the general ethos has to do with individualism and self expression
Uh-huh.
and not adhering to somebody else's expectations. But it's not individualistic in the absence of community. It's also community bound and committed to cultural and political change and critique. And I think mysticism could and should be that as well. And it's about DIY. It's about figuring out your own way to do things in small groups or individuals coming together, either against or despite corporate or cultural powerhouses. And right now, white Christian nationalism is a corporate and cultural powerhouse that needs to be pushed back against. And punk is happy to do that. And hopefully, mystics are happy to do that too. So we'll get into that another time. Personal and local activism. So that's a quick rundown of what punk means to me. But when it comes to perennial, because that's my second part of the title, is that's essentially what is true everywhere. It's the places that are shared amongst religious traditions, different faith traditions or faith perspectives. It was a term used initially by Aldous Huxley and folks of that era. And then later, Rabbi Rami Shapiro has made it much more familiar in pop culture, and Richard Rohr as well, one of my teachers. I love the World Wisdom Bible.
Mhm.
Rami Shapiro has the chapters are by things that are considered universal amongst these spiritual traditions, such as do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and that God is one, etc. And so you've got all the different scriptures from all the different traditions in one place, unifying. So that's what perennial is. So that's where my name comes from. Tell us about what it means to be a feral contemplative, because you came up with that one too.
Sure, sure. So let me begin by saying that when I told my beloved, my wife, that I was thinking about taking on this concept of feral contemplative as a self-descriptor, her first question was, "Does this mean you bite?" So,
That seems like a personal question between the two of y'all,
well,
you know?
well, we won't go any further down that road, but I will say that's not what I mean by feral. So, I mean, certainly, the word feral implies untamed or wild or, maybe outside the bounds of civilized society. But I think that when I hear the word feral, and of course I think of feral cats, we have a cat that lives with us who is a feral cat that we love dearly. Um, I think of feral as wild, but also having a relationship with
Yeah.
that which is not wild, that which is civilized or cultured or whatever.
Mm.
So it's not just pure wild. It's wild in relationship, and so
Wild in relationship.
so and so to be a feral contemplative means that I'm not a monk, I'm not a priest, I'm not a minister, I'm not somebody who has that kind of you know in the middle of things relationship maybe with the institution. So my relationship is maybe a little bit in the woods, maybe a little bit in the wilderness, a little bit in the desert, kind of like the desert mothers and fathers or the early Celtic saints, those kinds of people. But still, it's not about just me and my own little thing. There's that connection maybe with the larger contemplative community. And so I realize that the two words have a tension there, but I like to dance with that tension or skate with
Yeah.
that tension. A little bit of wildness, but also a deep appreciation for silence, a deep appreciation for the monastic culture, even though I myself am not called to be a monk. And so that tension is my sweet spot. That's kind of
Mm.
where I think my spiritual life unfolds. And hopefully that might speak to some folks who want to be part of our community as well.
Absolutely. I think it will. I think it
So,
will.
so maybe now we need to talk about, the name of our Substack slash podcast slash wisdom camp experience, and that is Radical Mystics. Do you want to take a crack at that, or do you want me to lead off?
Yeah. Well, when I think about it, I think about the prophets.
Mhm.
Not that either of us are necessarily prophets, but just the ideology there that Richard Rohr always described it as people on the edge of the inside.
Mhm.
The prophets didn't go around telling other people in other religions and other cultures that they were wrong. The prophets would challenge the people of their own group. And so, because you and I would still consider ourselves Christians amongst wider things, I think the radical piece is challenging people within our own group or culture or belief system.
Mhm.
And I think that that's part of what we can effectively do in a good way, but also inviting others in as well, like radical hospitality,
Mhm.
radical invitation,
Mhm.
right? So I think of it as being on the edge of the inside or being peripheral. And as I had said before, based on my own religious trauma and sort of this both and existence, is I've always kind of felt on the edge of the inside, and I'm really comfortable there. And I think that for me, radical mysticism is about that. It's about the depth of the silence and the individual experience with the divine, but also where that meets our place in this existence, in our meat suits, right? As
Mhm.
we encounter one another, that there's a place for that as well. So that was sort of where I was coming at it from. How would you describe it? What does it mean to you?
Well, radical and mystic are both words that carry almost a constellation of
Yeah,
meanings.
yeah, yeah.
And so clearly, I'm going to have my own take on it, which may or may not be yours or even anyone necessarily that listens to this. But I'm an etymology nerd. I love, the history of a word and trying to crack a word open with its earliest meaning. And radical, of course, comes from radix, the same Latin word that we get radishes from. So it means root. to be at the root of things. And so, to be a radical in my mind means, among many other things, means somebody that wants to get to the root of things. They want to dig deep, get to the bottom of things, if you will. And so, we talk about political radicals, who want to see significant change in society. But then a radical mystic to me is someone who wants the kind of deep interior change or transformation
Mm.
that mysticism seems to represent, both for themselves and maybe again for the community or for society on a larger, more macro level. So to be a radical mystic is not just to be on your own private little, me and God journey. Maybe there's a place for that, like Jesus of Nazareth says, go into your inner room and do your spiritual practice in there. So, so there is a solitary dimension to the mystical life, but there's also a communal dimension. And so to be a radical mystic is somebody who kind of fires on both of those cylinders. Go deep within, find that deep rootedness. Again, call it God, call it spirit, call it the mystery, the divine, all of the language fails. But to find that deep rootedness in your own heart, the soil of your own heart, but then to bring that out into your relationships, to bring that out into your community, your tribe, the collective that you may be part of, ultimately extending to the planetary collective.
Yeah.
And so a radical mystic is a change agent, somebody who wants a better world. They want a better interior world, but also a better exterior world as
Love
well.
it.
So,
Love it.
yeah, yeah.
What is it that gives you hope and joy?
Hope and joy. Well, you'll probably be grumpy because I got there first. Because I have a feeling your answer might be similar, but we'll see. We'll see. We haven't, obviously rehearsed these answers here. Um, I think that, and this was again inspired by Evelyn Underhill and her wonderful book, Practical Mysticism. There's a chapter in that book called Self Adjustment. And it's really her take on inner purification or inner healing or cleansing. And she doesn't use these exact words, but she suggests that the transformation of the mystical life, of the interior life, is like a movement from kind of a commercial life to a creative life.
Mm.
So a movement from a life that is all about transaction, that's all about kind of externalized value, into a life that is kind of anchored in that inner creative impulse,
Mm.
that kind of the fountain of kind of divine fecundity that I believe we all carry. We all have it within us. Different people may be more in touch with it than others. And so obviously I find hope and joy in the mystical tradition.
Yes.
But I also find hope and joy in poetry and in music and song, in art, architecture, dance, theater, all the creative functions, but even expanding it even further, the creativity of gardening, the creativity of hospitality, the creativity of community building, agitating for social justice. Wherever human beings are taking the time to get in touch with their creative impulse and then sharing that in the world to make themselves better people, but hopefully to make the world a better place. That gives me hope and that gives me joy.
Wow, you're right. We do have a lot of overlap there, though. But um, yeah, and I love how you keep coming back to Evelyn too. That's amazing. Well, for me, it was. I mean, you said it much better than me, so I've just got a few notes. I mean, I would have to start by saying what gives me hope and joy is my kids, and especially my
Yeah,
grandkids.
yeah.
And then after that, I've got beauty, art, nature, everything that you were saying so well. And then also trust in the universe and understanding that all growth comes from tension.
Mm.
Because we live in a world right now where there's a whole lot of tension, especially in the US. And well, and the Middle East, and I guess it's everywhere, and Ukraine and everything else. So yeah, a lot of tension. But we don't get where we need to be without that tension. And so that's what gives me hope. Current leadership in the US does not give me hope, but the people in the US give me hope. that this tension is part of a bigger process. And so that's what gives me hope. And then joy is all the other things you talked about: poetry, art, architecture, music, nature, words, music, all the good stuff.
Well, I know we don't want to be too long with this initial recording, so really one more question that I have, and that is, Debony, what is your vision for this podcast, this Substack, this thing we have created?
Well, first of all, my vision is that it will be flexible and elastic. And as you and I keep going, we can add stuff and take away stuff, and it will be a living thing. Um, so, whatever we say today is not etched in stone, but just a couple of bullet points that I thought of were to create a welcome invitation for folks like myself and like yourself who may not fit into a cookie cutter, who've been unsure of their seat at the table. I want us to be welcoming to all of those people, including atheists. I don't think this is a show your religion card at the door kind of place. I think this is a show up to have good conversations. And, many of the atheists that I know are profoundly spiritual people, although they, are not necessarily referring to the same scriptures or anything else that gets them where they want to go. So I just would love for everyone to feel like this is just a place for interesting dialogue and connection,
Mhm.
without any fences around it. And then I am, as a psychotherapist as well, I'm always interested in healing religious trauma. And I think that the kinds of things that you and I want to talk about and the kinds of people that you and I want to talk to will have the potential to bring about some healing from religious trauma and feeling included for people who may not have before. And just the kind of, I want us and again our guests to have open conversations that expand people's worldview. I would like to think that this is a place of growth and learning something that you might not have known before, or having permission to think or behave in a way that you haven't known before. And I would hope to create depth of spiritual life that people who might have not understood mysticism before will understand it in a way that creates a daily practice for them and a lifelong practice of silence and engagement with the holy mystery. And then I want us to have fun. So far, so good. I want it to be fun for us and fun for our folks.
Wonderful, wonderful.
How about you?
I don't have too much to add to that, except that, I have long said, in my own work, that mysticism is about stories,
Mm.
and that there is kind of an essential place when you think of the desert mothers and fathers. They were storytellers. The Buddha, Jesus, they were storytellers.
Mm-hmm.
Many of the great mystics, they tell their own personal stories, or they tell stories based on the tradition, what have you. So I would hope that this forum, whether we're talking about blog posts, or we're talking about this podcast, or even the live events right now, we have one on the calendar. There may be others. That whenever we gather under this umbrella of radical mystics, that it's a place where we can tell and share and listen to our stories,
Oh, I
our
love it.
our individual stories, our collective story, the planetary story, and that out of stories, hopefully we can all find spiritual nurture. You mentioned healing from trauma. Again, an inspiration to build community, an inspiration to work in tandem with other kind of conscious souls, again under that larger rubric of, quote, making the world a better place, unquote. And hopefully that's something we can do. And so with that in mind, I'd like to finish my part of this conversation for tonight by just saying, to anyone who's listening to this, we want you to be part of the circle too. And that, obviously, Debony and I are going to be creating this Substack kind of, program here, but there are opportunities for people to leave comments. When we start doing live recordings, to have, chatting, that we really want this to be a circle of care,
Yeah.
and to get input from people, to get suggestions for podcast guests, suggestions for topics that you'd love to see us take on, and that this isn't just the Debony and Sky show. This is an invitation into a circle, and we hope people will feel that this is a circle that they would like to be part of. As Debony said, everyone is welcome. So that's my hope.
Love it.
Well, are we done for tonight?
I feel like we're done for tonight, but how this is like a first step in a long, exciting journey.
So, friends, we're still learning our way, and we'll, be back. I don't know if it's in a week or 2 weeks or however soon. Um, it's funny because we led by saying this was recorded live. Well, it was recorded on Substack, but we do intend to be doing some of these live, and we hope you'll be able to join us. So stay tuned.
And we should probably mention the Wild Goose Festival too.
Obviously. So, this is, we're recording this in July of 2026. And in early September of 2026, Debony and I are leading a day-long program called Wisdom Camp that will be at the Wild Goose Festival in North Carolina.
And we're going to be talking about radical mysticism all day. We're going to unpack some of the stuff that we alluded to here, but we're going to go a lot deeper, and it will be a very interactive and engaging day to kick off the Wild Goose Festival.
And we'll have some opportunity for some personal reflection, some spiritual exercises, but also some conversation. And again, hopefully a lot of fun. We did an event like that at the Wild Goose Festival last year. That's really how radical mysticism kind of got kicked off. And so it was out of that we were inspired to create this Substack, and then hopefully deepen the circle, deepen the conversation when we gather in North Carolina in September. So visit the Wild Goose Festival online, wildgoosefestival.org, I believe it is.
Wildgoosefestival.org.
Yes, okay.
You got to put festival in there.
And when you register to join, use the code, let me see if I got it right, A-CM.
You got it.
A-CM, and that will get you $50 off your admission. You do have to buy a separate ticket for the Wisdom Camp, so it basically covers most of your costs for the Wisdom Camp ticket. But I do hope we'll see you there, not just for Wisdom Camp, but for the entire Goose Festival. It's a wonderful program and a great opportunity to connect with some fellow travelers and some beautiful souls. So hopefully we'll see you at the Goose. All right, I think we're done. Till next time, friends. Take care and stay radical.
Love it.